Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking a couple minutes to come hear about my capstone presentation titled Implementing Co-op and Program Development for Outpatient Neuro OT. And so, a real brief introduction. My name is Sean Colley. I am a current third-year WashU student completing their capstone at Memorial Hospital Belleville's Orthopedic and Neuroscience Center. I have been studying under Heidi Hoskins, who is one of the rehab supervisors there. And so for my capstone, I had two primary focus areas that I wanted to address. My first focus area was advanced clinical practice. And so I wanted to obtain further education in the co-op approach and gain experience in implementing co-op in the outpatient neuro setting. I also wanted to gain experience with program development. So I want to gain experience with conducting a needs assessment as well as experience with completing the associated program development plan associated with the needs assessment. And so that's what we'll be talking about today as part of my capstone. So my first objective for my capstone was to demonstrate an understanding of the stroke population through addressing cognitive deficits through healthcare system and through literature review. And so I developed interview questions to gather information on clients who came to the clinic. This was to gather kind of a baseline level of knowledge as to who's coming to the clinic, what are their needs, what kinds of things are they working on in therapy, so that I was able to recognize where some barriers might be in place as far as implementing co-op and program development. And so I completed brief semi-structured interviews with the clients at the clinic to determine program development needs, as well as if the population that the clinic sees was a good fit for co-op. Moving on to the second objective, I wanted to demonstrate professionalism and effective communication skills while working with professionals. This is obviously important in the capstone experience. I wanted to establish an appropriate communication routine and clarify the mentor-mentee roles during capstone early on in the process. And to do this, I was able to establish a communication plan with my mentor, and I documented weekly email updates that I provided to her, as well as our correspondence plan as part of my capstone. Third objective was to demonstrate competency in conducting a clinical needs assessment at the site to develop further clinical skills and assist in program development. So the needs assessment was largely conducted through interviews with therapists and Heidi herself. From these interviews, we had found a gap in service delivery related to services for post-concussion patients with post-concussion syndrome for OT. And after doing additional community resource mapping, which you can see on the right-hand side, we noticed that there was a need in the Belleville area. Really, the clinic that I was at was the only one that was in the Belleville area that was able to provide post-concussion syndrome care for OT, but the clinic was currently being underutilized for various reasons. And so we determined that the occupational therapy department at this clinic had the resources to fill this need in the community. And so we went ahead and created a program development plan to address these needs. The fourth objective relates to that program development plan. And so I designed and implemented a program development project to assist with the site's needs. I took additional continuing education courses in concussion and met with therapists who do concussion rehab in the greater St. Louis area to kind of figure out what goes into concussion care, what are the key elements, what do you need to be considering. And from that knowledge, I identified resources and developed tools to help therapists evaluate and treat post-concussion syndrome. So I was able to provide the clinic with educational materials. I updated some pamphlets and provided a educational presentation on OT's role in concussion care. I also provided them with better evaluation materials. So I went through from the materials that I had learned about, found some concussion specific assessments that are commonly used with concussion care. And I also incorporated these into an EPIC SMART phrase that the evaluating therapists at the site could follow along step by step to make sure that they were hitting all the necessary elements in a concussion evaluation. I also developed some treatment materials for post-concussion syndrome. These related to vision, balance, and activity planning and energy conservation. The fifth objective, now we're switching gears kind of onto the co-op side. So I wanted to develop a foundational understanding of cognitive interventions, which is co-op and guided discovery that could be used with the stroke population. And so I completed co-op training through the International Cognitive Approaches Network, which is based in Canada. From this learning, I documented daily learning summaries of the things that I was learning from the course, how I responded to the content. And I also have a certificate demonstrating that I did end up passing the course. And it's a overall very comprehensive course. I would strongly recommend it to anyone interested in learning more about co-op. The sixth objective was to gain clinical experience and develop tools and resources to implement cognitive interventions, so co-op with patients. With collaborating with a therapist at the site, I identified 2 patients who I was able to complete co-op interventions with on a regular basis, and I documented their progress using the co-op approach. I also then created case studies for each patient that future therapists could come back and look on and see what is the co-op approach, what does it look like in practice, and what does it look like at that site specifically. I also created a co-op resource binder for the therapists to use and learn more information about co-op in general. And I also presented these materials to the OT staff as well. Moving on to the seventh and last objective was obviously to disseminate the information that I learned through my capstone. So I completed a brief self-reflection on the capstone process and my experience with it. I also documented proof of the clinical dissemination projects that I did. These are not currently publicly available. They are considered intellectual property of Memorial Belleville at this point. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit more, I would strongly encourage you to look at my ePortfolio, which I will provide you here in a minute. But the first presentation was on OT's role in concussion rehab. This was used to advocate for OT and to educate other professions on how OTs can contribute to the care team for post-concussion syndrome. I also did a presentation on OT's role in the concussion evaluation and treatment. And this was used to educate the outpatient OT staff on the evaluation protocol that I had developed for the clinic and some treatment considerations that were important to note for post-concussion syndrome. Then obviously this presentation as well will contribute towards this learning objective. So the summary of the findings from the capstone, co-op was an effective and appropriate tool to be used in the outpatient neuro setting. It does require additional training and certification to use effectively, so I'd strongly recommend looking at the International Cognitive Approaches Network for more training. And the staff at the site have the resources that they need to learn more about co-op and seek this training if they decide to use it in their daily practice as well. And then secondly, moving on to the concussion side, the clinic at Memorial Hospital Belleville has an adequate resources to begin evaluating and treating post-concussion patients. And the tools that I developed for them will help the site train and develop competency with post-concussion for future therapists and students alike. In impact summary, therapists at the site have a improved understanding of the benefits and uses of the co-op approach in outpatient neuro. Multiple people have mentioned that they have an improved understanding of the certification process that is required to implement co-op as well. And the therapists, like I said before, at the clinic have an increased capacity to conduct the post-concussion syndrome evaluations and treatments to serve the need that was identified in their community. These therapists also have the additional resources needed to increase the amount of referrals that the clinic receives for OT services. So for sustainability, co-op is often underutilized and misunderstood. So I think that OT programs like WashU can provide more hands-on examples and opportunities to practice using the approach to really understand what it's about. I've also provided a list of next steps for the clinic to continue the work that I have done and a list of key stakeholders that they can contact to receive more referrals for concussion. OT programs like WashU can also continue educating on emerging areas of practice like concussion. And it's important to note that as therapists and students alike, it's our role to advocate for OT in these emerging areas of practice, such as concussion. So if you want to hear more or learn more about what I talked about here, the ePortfolio that I have linked here through the QR code or the link at the bottom has all of my documentation for my capstone objectives. So please feel free to look at that. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Happy to answer anything through email. You can see both my emails are listed below. Happy to talk about anything that you have related to the capstone. And if nothing else, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for coming.